Those of you, make sure that you subscribe, help you to subscribe. And so Dr. G's, you already know, has a new YouTube channel. It's called Dr. G's Official.
Dr. G is official.
Dr. G is official. So that is capital DR, capital GIS, capital OFFICIAL. So that's YouTube requires at least 1,000 subscribers in order for the channel to go live. And so go and subscribe and help that out, because she's going to be bringing a lot of. We have actually a lot of people calling, even from other hot channels, that want to come on Dr. G's, and so she's setting up this channel to make that available to you. And so subscribe. And it'll be linked down at the bottom. So check out on your screen.
You just have to
and look at that link. And so subscribe to Dr. G's new YouTube channel. Dr. G is official, and that's it in one word, etc. And subscribe. And thank you for your support for the House of Reawakening Minds. And so many of you from around the world have been supporting, and we appreciate you. And many of you have come on and have not. We appreciate you too. And business person being claiming to have taxing authority at all, whether it's a penny or whether it's more than a penny, the principle remains the same. If there is no counter or rebuttal to their position, which it has not been, particularly with our people, and particularly with many people among our people who have been involving the lives of our people in organizations, clubs, institutions, whether they're religious, political, etc., that have not informed them of these fundamentals. The evidence is self-evident once you have a concept of what we're talking about tonight, that there are two things: disingenuous or incompetent, or a combination of the two. And the fact of the matter is, when someone is in a position of authority or in a position of scholarly leadership, keep this in mind, that ignorance of these principles are no excuse and are never to be excused. However, because over the generations they have been excused, because they're usually hiding behind words that we respect, such as Buddha, Confucius, Allah, Muhammad, Jesus, etc. And our people get starry-eyed and not thinking that these people are really parasitic in their operations with you, distinguished from actually serving you or helping you in any manner. So a bill of particulars is one nature of writ, which should be standardized in all communities, and particularly in the Aboriginal communities of Moors, who have been falsely tagged and with nom de guerre, such as Negro, Black, Colored, etc. All of those are nom de guerre. Keep that in mind. And nom de guerre are essentially what is also known in the vernacular of servitude as slave, and that's connotative, slave tags or brands. And because many of our people have not been schooled in basic etymology, those are basic grammatical skills, they're not aware that many of these things or words and terms that we have taken for granted were actually nom de guerre, and no one informed you. Meanwhile, many of these people who should have informed you are always talking about gods and devils every 2 minutes, and yet are void of basic elementary comprehension of operations of civilization that operate on this planet since time immemorial. And it's not to condemn or to knock or to negatively put down or criticize people who have been subjected to that mind control system. However, we cannot continue to sacrifice generations by not telling them the truth of how things actually have been operating. and so that their energies, their finances, their time, their services, and their honor can no longer be stolen and abused or misused by people claiming to be their so-called leaders or spiritual guides or preachers or imams or rabbis or etc., whatever titles of addictship that they may carry. That's not condemning the addictship principle. It is, by the way, condemning those who have watched the people suffer and have been playing it safe, or what you would, I would prefer to say, not wanting to rock the boat while pretending that they fear no one but God, fear no one but Allah, fear no one but Jesus, etc., while guiding the people or misguiding the people who have, they themselves, who've also been taxing, whether they call it tithe or not. Tithe is a Roman tax. That's what the word tithe comes from. And then not telling them the truth about how things have been operating and how and why they've been suffering at the hands of people who have been de facto and fraudulently and impersonating and occupationally claiming to be government and have been causing damage to families for generations. A bill of particulars is one writ that is in the nature of the quo warranto, but also in the nature of discovery. So write that down too, discovery. And so that's in your frame of reference too. So I'm going to share with you an actual bill of particulars. I'm not going to read all of it because it's actually 6 pages. And this was constructed in August in the August moon in the of 2014 AD, 1434 MC, etc. And it comes like this: legally lawfully competent, colon. And I won't use the brother's name or appellation at this time. And we have his appellation and his ex-relation, or the estate name that is used by the corporate operators in their straw operations of taxation. And of course, many of you already know by law to reclaim the heritable positions that were lost during forced servitude, which is known as the straw, that by virtue of honoring your mothers and fathers, the political and civil operations of restoring that proper status is referred to as nationalization. That's universal on the planet. Whether you're dealing with the construct of the political order itself, the constitutional political order of any nation state, and or the people's true nationals or so-called citizens of a particular nation, specified, specific, and established for the fact and for the record, never assumed. Therefore, as an example, if someone is claiming to be a nation of any type on planet Earth and don't teach nationality, it's immediately made aware to anyone that understands principles of civilization that such persons are committing a fraud against the people. I.e., it's sort of like anyone who's claiming to feed people and taking finance from people, talking about agriculture and talking about being farmers, and then not teaching horticulture and farming to the people who they're taking finance from. And they have them in these organizations for decades and talking about feeding the poor and uplifting the young, and then don't teach them these things. A being who knows what these things are knows that such persons are committing a fraud against the people. And thus, in order for people in organized body's politics, which happens all across the planet, which you see nations and nation states, etc. And if they're void in the operations of nationality at any point in their relationship to others, they can be and usually are made subject to mistreatments, abuses, economic deprivation, estate theft. It's also called as cheating, which constantly goes on in targeted communities at North America, often called gentrification and things like that. That's a diversionary statement for as cheating of estates. Keep that in mind. So a bill of particular issued by yourselves or your family members or anyone who comprehends fundamental, this is keep in mind, fundamental civics. We're not talking about anything complex, fundamental. But because people have not been familiar, it may seem not so familiar with many of you. However, get familiar with it. So we're going to go into this bill of particulars. I wish you could see directly this because we've been so busy, actually around here, very busy, that we haven't had time to post some of this. And because it's private, it's another reason that we didn't post it. And Dr. Nail may share it with you in the future with the nomen and the appellation marked out, but the principles of the structure will be there for you to analyze and for you to critique, as well as for you to use as not necessarily as a template, but a template in concept, even if you expand on it or reduce it in order to counter any claim of any beings that claim to be tax collectors in any sort of any type in relationship to you, the natural being, or your estate, etc. So keep in mind this while we're going through this bill of particulars. Private properties are not lawfully taxable. So keep that in mind. All taxed private property, like your homes, your houses, your cars, etc., was and is theft and a fraud from the door, and is part of the problem. The bill of particulars, for those who know, is one of the instruments that is used to counter such fraudulent beings who have been criminally using the platform of government to actually extort, rob, cheat people by the day. And they've been getting away with it for generations. Bill of particulars. Legally, lawfully competent. Appellation of the being that's sending this out. With a notation of the ex relation nomen that is used in everyday affairs, often known as the straw. In propria persona and solo proprio, juris consults. Moorish American, free white person, lawful heirs, natural freeholders, by birthright, non-U.S. citizens, demandants, non-demandants, non-U.S. citizen. That's very important because part of the operations that they're classifying the people as U.S. citizen, which is actually a stock designation, not a designation of natural living beings. And people have not been made aware of that, which is also why they never have, whenever you see them dealing with people that come from other territories, etc., and they'll say U.S. citizen, but they will not issue a nationality card because the U.S. is not a nation. It's a private, foreign, for-profit, actually human trafficking corporation. And it always has been from the door. And it's de facto in every aspect. Unfortunate truth, but it is nevertheless the truth. Handle it. I know it's uncomfortable for some of you who have been miseducated, misdirected, but it, however, is the truth. The truth is for everyone. However, many don't want the truth. But for those who want the truth, I'm glad that you're spending a little time with us here at the House of Reawakening Minds, and we will share it with you. The reference of this notice of bill particular is a reference of quote unquote 29, bill of attainder 10,000 in specie, lawful money, mark, letter of marque for international tort and violations of treaty. 1786, 1787, 1836, Treaty of Peace and Friendship, Moroccan Empire. The treaty was sealed at Morocco with the seal of the Emperor of Morocco, June 23rd, 1786. Now keep in mind, when you're making reference to the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, you actually have multiplicity of treaties that actually come under that banner, etc. So whether you're talking about the J Treaty and other treaties, etc., Treaty of Tripoli, all of them are related. So keep that in mind. So you have multiple territories under the Moroccan Empire that span from the eastern hemisphere of the planet into the western hemisphere of the planet. And when you're making that reference, you're talking treaty enforcement. And when you're talking treaty enforcement, you're talking constitutional enforcement. They are looked at and comprehended by all people in government and all true scholars as one and the same instrumentality in obligatory nature. This is why they do not teach civics to particular people who have been targeted under the Christian black codes and who agree to be black under those codes and have been abused for centuries by their consent of being something or claiming to be who and what they are not. The other problem that you have is people have confused their organizations, their clubs, their little prayer institutions, and have contaminated themselves spiritually by equating the little social solace systems that men have created, confusing them with your pedigree or your bloodline, your birthright, divine crystal stream that runs from your heart through your body, given to you by your mother, which is your nationality, which stands supreme and is not to be equated with the clubs that you may belong to, whether you call them Muslim, Christian, Jew, or whatever tag that you put on them, has nothing at all or whatsoever to do with divine operations from the source of creation, etc., which is not to be contaminated. So therefore, your concept of operations, your concept of thinking are to be contrary to anything that corrupts the blood. So there shall be no corruption of blood. And whenever, and also look at that as a phrase, corruption of blood, and then look that up, because that's another subject matter in its own right. And so this instrument is also a countermeasure to corruption of blood. The straw man operations is designed for corruption of blood. The different pharmaceutical operations established by the hybrid Europeans to inject into the bloodstreams of the people is a corruption of blood and an indirect attempt to distort and to remove you from descendability by virtue of putting a patent on your actual physical blood by virtue of injecting you with patented instrumentality of things that they have called many names that are alleging to make your life better, but are actually designed to steal your birthright. And that is not discussed. And also, if you go in that area, they will block that information because they really still, on multiple levels, do not want the people to recognize that when they interject foreign substance within your bloodstream by any format, they're also in the background creating bonds against it and on patents and claiming under the unum sanctum the Dum Diverses, and the Intercatera Divina operations of the popes of Rome via the Jesuit order, etc., and with their military operations known as the United States Corporation that has been fostered onto the planet under the guise of a nation, which it is not, was not, never will be, and has been fraudulently operating, going to and fro the earth, devouring nations. And finally, we have the what you would call the gift from our ancestors of people beginning to wake up and to reject these people and their order of false constructs, and whether they are Asiatic or hybrid Europeans around the planet, they are arising and starting to reject the fraud, the impostorship, the occupation, the de facto operations of the Jesuit order, and the club members of the Crown of the Circle Church and Chancery operating from Fleet Street, England, operating the judicial systems in violation of treaty and constitution that has been creating, managing, and profiting from the wars in most of your modern and contemporary times have been actually initiated by, funded by, managed by, and profiting to members of the Circle Church and Chancery, who are also members of the Roman Curia. So in the nature of this bill of particulars, you're talking to all of them. However, in a more direct, you're talking to a person who may claim to be the tax collector for the city of Pennsauken to you, and you owe us a water tax, and you owe us a property tax, and we're going to put a lien on you if you don't respond positively to this corporate operation. Excuse the fire engines in the background. Background noise. And many of our people, not being aware of what that really is, have been submitting to it for a few generations, and logically the children have learned from their parents, not knowing that their parents didn't know better. And so when the communities of the people have been suffering politically, economically, and socially, they've been falsely trained under animal husbandry to use the misstatement called racism and prejudice as a diversion of what's really going on, when the problem was and is to this very day birthright theft, and is cheating operations by members of the Roman Curia, disguised and impersonating themselves as U.S. government officials, and states of New Jersey, states of Pennsylvania, states of Delaware, municipal pseudo officers, who all of which have not been constitutionally sanctioned, nor can they present to you a quo warranto proving their authority. So the bill of particulars will in its nature also be a quo warranto. So back to point. That's why I say we can't read it all, but so that you can understand the nature and comprehend the nature of the bill of particulars, I ran off some of those things to correct the concepts that you may have already, or that you may develop when you hear this. But this is the state of mind that you're to be in. So, so the jurisdiction is i.e. private, commercial, residential status. And that's the status that they have put the people in, and when they're taxing, as an example, people's homes, and the people have not been aware of those different statuses. So when they're doing what is known as taxation, so write this down and get very grounded in all of these areas, because this is where your taxation issues will arise. One will be private, one will be commercial, one will be residential. Study each one of them and be clear on what does not apply to you in fact. Distinguish from what they have said applies to you and you did not counter it or you did not know the difference. One, I, and then you put your appellation. Further demand verifiable copies of any quote unquote original contracts and or copies of any quote unquote endorsed consensual agreements quote unquote that gave rise to and are known or willing authorization or consent to the current classification status of the said estate private property geographically located at or near, and then you have there the number of that's placed on it, the property, politically placed upon the property, known commonly referred to as an address. And keep in mind, the address does not actually apply to the property. The address that's given to a location is actually a private foreign tax assessment classification designation. As an example, when people would say to you, what is your address? Know that any address never belongs to you. So you don't have an address. An address is a tax assessment number that is politically given fraudulently to private property in order to misclassify it to tax it. And this was accelerated particularly since the Delano Roosevelt administration in the 30s, although it was also initiated earlier. Those of you who have your libraries intact, do a little research on taxation, do a little research on aboriginal titles distinguished from mortgages and deeds, and allodial titles distinguished from mortgages and deeds, and timelines, particularly relative to 1913, when Woodrow Wilson met with the bankers and the members of the Circle Church and Chancery at Jekyll Island off the coast of geographical Georgia, located at North America. Now, so I demand verifiable copies of these instrumentalities when they're making a claim, right? And so you want to have copies of all original contracts, all authorization or consent forms, and if it does not contain on any of those instrumentalities your appellation or autograph or what they refer to as signature, understand the claim that they make is not valid and is in fact a fraud. An assumption of consent is not sufficient in law. However, most people never challenge and therefore deny their own standing at law in relationship to their estate, not being aware that the estate is theirs and not the property of the corporate state of New Jersey, nor of the corporate agencies and corporate owners of Pennsauken, New Jersey, or any other municipality and its operatives who have been taxing the people's private property and have built their private wealth upon that for generations. Logically, not morally, not ethically, but logically, such persons and such beings do not want this information being shared with you, but you already know how we've been rolling with the Order of the Round Table and also at the House of Reawakening Minds. Because this is goes into the reality of the politics, and of course, it takes the people. It challenges their third dimensional thinking that they've been trained in under the animal husbandry operations of the General Education Board of 1902 that has been operating pretty powerfully, not just here, but around the world, and has caused much damage against the human family. And by many of the people not being aware of it, they take offense at the truth instead of offense at the false information that they've been trained in for generations. So now, number two, in your command, in this bill of particulars, and it's also in the nature of discovery what it is. Two, as the Township of Pennsauken Incorporated tax commissioner, tax collector, tax assessor, and Township of Pennsauken Corporation attorney, did you know that New Jersey State Republic is distinguished from the State of New Jersey Incorporated, 1844, and that the State of New Jersey is a private corporation foreign to the Constitution for the United States, States United, and that no corporate entity which does not have an existing valid taxation law sanctioned by a de jure constitutional Congress for the United States, which by quo warranto via Article 3 only grants the power or the lawful authorization for any constitutional officer or person to collect or lay an excise tax on property. Answer, yes or no. Keep this in mind when you're sending this out, that they can't ever lawfully say they don't know, because they do know. And if they didn't know, they had no business holding that office. And keep in mind, under law, that any contractor or employee or officer of any state, etc., or municipality, or any governmental position at all that puts any tax burden or claim of authority on the nationals or the citizens can never, by law, by any process, claim that they did not know the law. Color of law excuses are void at law, in law, at every junction or claim. They can never be rebutted. In other words, no person or entity, operative or contractor that say they didn't know the law is ever excused. However, they've been saying that to you. And the real deal is that applies to them. And they've been screwing you, robbing you, getting wealthy off of you, and actually vesting in instrumentality and organizations and corporate constructs that actually further have injured the people. Back to the quo warranto. If there is, pardon me, I apologize. This is number 3. If there's any objections to the above facts, then please provide the substantive evidence to prove, and this is your request to such persons who keep claiming to be government. Keep this in mind. This thing is freezing up on me, I think. This is so funny. Whenever I start getting into really information that really helps the people, they start messing with. This is why another reason why I don't use the maps. They start messing with it.
They're starting with this 4th of July stuff already.
Yes. If there's any objections or are any objections to the above stated facts, then please provide substantive evidence to prove the above facts to be in error, to be false, to be incorrect, or to be untrue. I demand that you provide the constitutional laws, constitutional acts of state, congressional acts, de jure legislation or provisionaries, that grants the authorization of the state of New Jersey or the township of Pennsauken assessor, division of taxation, division of revenue collection, etc., to exercise such authorities. And you can see why they're getting upset already. And what's happening also as I'm talking to you is that it's actually, every time I move the cursor, it's skipping and it's jumping. Didn't do that downstairs. It didn't do that before, but you already know how that rolls and you know what's going on right now. But conceptually, so the Bill of Attainders is in itself a construct of a quo warranto, because you're commanding of them the evidence, the discovery, and the quo warranto nature of their claim. In doing so, particularly when you do it officially on paper, and particularly if you're flying your colors, that means your national flag, etc., now it becomes an international issue, which it always is anyway. And of course, fundamentally, if you're dealing with valid or honorable so-called leadership or so-called spiritual guys and all that stuff, they keep talking about divinity, etc. It is their position to challenge, and is their position to then, what you would call, switch their ministerial hats into their consular position and counter the claim of the foreign state intruding on the jurisdictional territories of the nationals or the citizens of another state. It's called acts of state. Write that down so you will comprehend acts of state, quote unquote acts of state. These things that I'm mentioning to you are necessary in your basic comprehension or your basic knowledge areas, so that the concept of the Bill of Particulars or a mandamus or an averment of jurisdiction, etc., can be comprehended why it is done, and your obligation to yourself as to why it is done, and the fact that you do it, and the other fact that you never neglect doing it, and also why these fundamentals, and expand it, because this is very simple, basically what we're talking about right now, but the nature of this conversation should be common in our communities. You should not be wasting your time marching and praying and sitting around talking about racism, which is all total diversion and mind control systems. That's not to condemn people who have good intentions. However, good intentions does not make a good surgeon. So get away with the dirty butter knives. And the same thing with operations in government, etc. So again, quo warranto. Now I'm going to, because it keeps skipping, so I'm going to deal with what's there. So as they interrupt, nature, divine nature, will come in and rescue. Anyway, 9. Since the Congress for the United States are the only lawful legislative body that has delegated authority to lay and collect taxes, then who and what entity authorized the Township of Pennsauken Incorporated Board of Taxation, Tax Collectors, and Tax Commissioner, and the State of New Jersey Incorporated and or its employees to lay and collect property taxes? Answer, and you have a space for them to answer, because they go like they send stuff to you. Oh, this is a summons to come to. You're going to be a juror. Like they send you stuff. You're supposed to be sending them stuff, but you're going to do it competently. And so these things, Bill of Particulars, and also discovery and quo warrantos, are the nature of your instruction as being nationals of the land, and those of you who think that you're citizens of the nation state. Because remember, the United States is not a nation, therefore you're not citizens of the United States. But if you think that you are, you're already in trouble. And I know it's really difficult for a lot of people, because the logic for all of us is to honor the fundamental principles of government, and to be a part of a legitimate governmental structure under what has been called citizens' duties and social duties. Because we have basic social duties and responsibilities to each other as being human. And in political order, there are fundamental civic operations and civic duties that we have to one another. However, an assumption on in those areas shall not be the norm with our people anymore. They must know the basics of these principles or civic basics, and this is just simply part of it. And again, why we're addressing this, because so much injury has come to our people, so much loss of property has come to our people by being escheated via liens coming from actually criminal operatives who have been impersonating as constitutional officers for decades, and it must be addressed. This bill of particulars is part of that address. Any questions, Dr. Nayo, in relationship to some of that? Because I think even though we have 6 pages here, the nature of it is, I think you most already have it.
There are questions and comments, but not necessarily with regard to.
Please don't tell them, make it clear so I don't don't muddy around.
Maybe I'm saying they may not be directly related to what you're saying. There are other things that are out here. Let me see. Yeah, I mean, there are questions and comments, but they're definitely not necessarily. They're not in regards in relation to what you are speaking on, to subject matter.
All right.
So
then I'll go into
well, here's a comment I'll share from Tracy Holcomb Bay. There is only one de jure government on the land. Everyone else is acting.
You got that right. And so actors are imposters. And this must be this must be cognate to everyone. Again, this is also why you do Quowantos, because that must be cleared up. In other words, also, as we and many people are trying to help our people get from under this artificial subjugation and non-begeer and strawman operations, that must be, these principles must be part of your cognate operations, your cognate thought processes. And it's not to be made at all or ever complex. This is why we're just talking the principles. And it's back to also people starting to get themselves in the state of mind of questioning people who claim to be government and doing it competently and knowing the proper questions to ask, not assuming anything. Because actually, as soon as they answer the first 2 questions, etc., they're already out of the box anyway. However, much of this is to contribute to the learning curve of the people who have been devoid or have been not told these facts. And as example, even when you're dealing with the Inquisition revenue services who are trying to put liens on people, etc., you would go to United States Code of Law, Title 26, CFR Code of Federal Regulations. And as you already know, that is a non-de jure and it's ex post de facto. And it's a colorable code. So once you understand that, you would automatically have a reference point to even counter them with the established law that they're claiming to be operating with, etc., or the authorization, and it's already dead and void. And this is, again, why they don't teach civics. So a thief, logically, and people, this is why they spend so much time or effort keeping the people, or in the general, what you call populace, battling against each other arguing fake race arguments and things like that to keep you from paying attention to the fact that the people have you been blindly and wrongfully and unfortunately claiming to be government has actually been enmity to you and actually been robbing you under a color of law and with hostility and with force of arms and using the tax stolen from you to create other entities to rob you and to injure you and to imprison you even further when you begin to counter their false claims. This is again why many people, once they find the truth out about the frauds that have been instituted, they start hesitating because they're full of fear. They're full of fear because the people who have been claiming to be your public servants, you begin to recognize, and they see that you recognize that they have really been your enemies. Unfortunate truth, but truth nonetheless. And you better learn to deal with it. And particularly many people who have, been sacrificing generations in the name of honoring or respecting or giving honor to people who you've been assuming to be legitimately or constitutionally elected officers. That whole platform has been compromised again since 1861, and not only have your alleged votes never counted, all of the elections have been rigged under de facto operations from then to now. Unfortunate, but it's true. That's not to condemn people's goodwill or trying to adhere themselves to or align themselves with the republic honor of constitution government. However, that's not what you've been getting, and you need to know that that's the fact. That's not opinion. That's the fact. And again, in order to rebut them, you do it with intelligence, not with violence. You can do it with intelligence, with a bill of particulars. When they send you something asking you questions and sign, you send them something and ask them questions and tell them to sign it and see if they do. I guarantee you they won't, because they know they're criminals. Problem of it is they know that the masses of the people are not aware and have not been aware that they have been organized criminals and members of the Circle Church and Chancery. And they've been causing most of the economic problems that you've ever experienced in all of your lives. And that's the truth. And understand, some devil or Satan didn't do it to you. So don't let them play that game with you either. And also the Greys from the dark side of the moon didn't do it to you either. These people that you've been calling government did it. And people that they have contracted at your expense to actually operate against you and to cause injury to you, economic, social, and political. Fact, fact, fact. Now, you also can go on. Now, remember, on each one of these questions that you present to them, you have a section for them to fill out, just like they've been sending stuff to you to fill out. And these are yes or no and qualification answers. Now, number 10, this is the agent who had sent this bill of attainder out in the name of taxation to this brother in 2014. And this is his question back to him. Daniel O'Brien, are you a member of the United States of America Congress? Are you member or members of the United States of America legislative branch of government, or are you a private corporation contractor? Answer, yes or no. Number 11, are you, Daniel O'Brien, an employee or private contractor of the International Revenue Service, or have you been delegated by the de jure Congress for the United States to act in a legislative or executive capacity? If so, please indicate herein and show all instrumentalities and provide all copies of affidavits or affirmations or delegations orders and executive orders for our investigation, and particularly under the rule of discovery. Answer yes or no. Note, and this is an interjection note, House Joint Resolution 192 issued by the 73rd Congress for the of the United States, not for the United States. First session, joint resolution to assure uniform value to the coins and currencies of the United States, whereas the holding of or dealing in gold affects the public interest and therefore subject to proper regulation and restriction, and whereas the existing emergency alleged has disclosed that provisions of obligations which purport to give the obligee a right to require payment in gold or a particular kind of coin or currency of the United States, or in an amount of money of the United States measured thereby, obstruct the power of the Congress to regulate the value of money of the United States, and are inconsistent with the declared policy of the Congress to maintain at all times the equal power of every dollar coined or issued by the United States in the markets and in the payment of debts. Now, therefore, be resolved by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that every provision contained in or made with respect to any obligation which purports to give the obligee the right to require payment in gold or particular kind of coin or currency, or in any amount of money of the United States measured thereby, is declared to be against public policy, and no such provision contained in or made with respect to any obligation hereafter incurred, and every obligation hereafter or heretofore incurred, whether or not any such provisions is contained therein or made with respect thereto, shall be discharged upon payment, dollar for dollar, in any such coin or currency which at the time is legal tender for public and private debts, and any such provision contained in any law authorizing obligations to be issued by or under the authority of the United States is hereby repealed, but the repeal of any such provision shall not invalidate any other provision or authority contained in such law. Now, since the tax collector, Daniel Bryant, is and are all doing business as the State of New Jersey, Township of Pennsauken Incorporated, Board of Taxation, Division of Revenue Collection, and the Tax Assessor Office, and are demanding money and payment for a taxation, then are any of you employees or contractors of any national, are you members of any national banking association, and are any of your companies or departments lawfully or lawful, are they lawful financial institutions registered with the Comptroller of Currency of the United States Department of Treasury, Department of Justice, and authorized to do banking in accordance with Title 12 Code of Federal, they're skipping on me again over there, messing with me. Oh, this is just so funny. So keep in mind, all of these activities that they're doing are consist of constructive fraud, illegal securitization. In other words, they're making securities unlawfully, and racketeering in violation of the RICO Act. That's racketeering, influence, corrupt organizations, and that would be Title U.S. Code of 1963, Section A, B, C, D, 3, in violation of the General Assembly's right of indigenous people And that's also 1786, 1787, 1836 treaty in force. And so you have care of carbon. This would be CC to the FOFR, Daniel O'Brien Jr., tax collector, Township of Pennsauken Incorporated Tax Office, 5605 North Crescent Boulevard, Pennsauken, New Jersey 00811. And keep this in mind. Put this in context with 2014. And at that time, Kim Guadagno, New Jersey State Secretary of State, New Jersey Department of State, P.O. Box 300, Trenton, New Jersey 08625. And then witness, trustee, jurist, in propria persona, Moorish American, natural heir, sovereign freeholder, propria plena, proprietas plena, aboriginal minister, etc. That's pretty much the closeout, although there's other stuff in between. And they've been messing with this stuff, but that's the nature. And so you start comprehending the duty and the obligations of the nationals and the citizens. Keep in mind, this is the duty, not just a point of reference that you should have knowledge of. It is actually the duty of the nationals and the citizens to enforce the law. So you've been negligent. We collectively have been negligent in our responsibilities and our duties as nationals, being the national of the land. And so that would deal with treaty and impose constitutional enforcement to the subjects, etc. And those who are citizens, their obligation to do the same to enforce the treaty and the Constitution. Failure to have done so has appeared to consent to criminal operatives imposing themselves under fraud elections to be government, and they've been operating since 1861 quite successfully to both undermine the republic in order to undermine the treaty and the Constitution, and they've been doing so quite successfully. And they've been actually fraudulently commanding a Roman tithe under the guise of property tax, which is also a fraud. And the people have been trained to that under animal husbandry, and they have been practicing or consenting to it, not knowing that not only does it not apply to them, not only that they have been misclassified, and that it is absolute criminal fraud. However, to your interest, to the interest of all of us, it is good and it is well that you begin to start putting these criminal operatives who have been imposturing as government in their place by stop cooperating and giving extortion taxes under false pretexts in a misclassification venue of color of law and color of office and color of operations, which has been going on and unfortunately has actually been used to enforce the fraud upon you. So these instrumentalities, such as Bill of Particulars and quo warrantos, is a public record of rebuttal. And they are challenged to answer that just the way they've asked you to answer. And with that, I cede to the people to ask any questions, because the nature of the principle is shared.
Okay, let me see. Taxation. This question. Well, how does this apply? Abiyomi Ross says, how does this apply to Canada?
It applies to all governments. And keep in mind that Canada and the United States Corporation have the same international number. They both come under the Circle Church and Chancery and the Queen of England. The idea that most people have that these are separate jurisdictions, that is more for the public than the fact. In other words, they're actually in partnership pretending to be separate jurisdictions only for the public.
And also,
but in fact, they are conjoined members of the Roman Curia.
and they also appear to have very strained trade deals, but like you said, they are one and the same.
They are, yes. And if you notice, often when they're making any public announcements, they will emphasize the distinction of the jurisdictions as different nation states. When the prime ministers of Canada knows that president is a corporate construct and not a national construct. And this is very important for people to comprehend that. And this is back to, again, even the problem that we have among our people always talking about nation of this, nation of that, and then not teach nationality, and they have never been challenged. They have never been challenged. And it is a violation, a severe mental, social, and political violation against the people to talk about anything concerning nation, self-determination, etc., and not tell the truth about nationality. It is a horrible violation against the people. And of course, because that violation has been inculcated in society, you can see why many people are not even aware of how these things apply or don't apply, and that they never applied to them factually in the first place, and that they were allowed to be imposed upon them as application is part of the fraud. And of course, the people themselves must reclaim their estate. They must be willing. It's sort of like this. How would it be that anyone would be willing to defend the birthright of any man, woman, or woman who is not willing to stand up for their own birthright? And it be the obligation of another to stand in defense of someone who is unwilling to defend themselves, when that is a divine right, a divine obligation. And this is back to even like if people would, for those who have been taught some fundamental civics in a civic order, as such as say the Moorish Temple of Science, they would look in the Circle 7 Quran as an example, chapter 29, to get also a concept of the sovereignty of the people. And those as fundamental civic principle, and that applies to people in general. So don't look at it because it's coming from active or conscious Moors that it applies to us and doesn't apply to others. It applies to everyone. It is universal in its character.
There are a couple of questions asking your take on the fact that the Florida governor, DeSantis, just signed a bill into law about civics.
Well, I would look at DeSantis and look at the nature of, or what you would call, the momentum that has taken place since Donald J. Trump has been in office for the United States. That anyone that starts teaching civics is definitely being influenced by Donald Trump for the restoration of treaty and constitution enforcement relative to the republic, distinguished from the corporation operations, which it has a lot to do with the controversy that surrounds Donald Trump now.
I use his name so much.
That's a fact. But it is indeed necessary for the people. Because, of course, most of you who studied the works of Noble Drew Ali, known as Professor Drew, know that from the beginning, he has been telling the people to enforce the Constitution. And that has been an integral part of the Moorish Divine and National movement. Of course, that's been breached by many too, which you also know. Which is also one of the reasons why we have been fortunate to even have a platform like this that Dr. Naila has maintained for all these years, whereas some of these things that has been suppressed in other platforms has been shared openly, even though we're still, been restricted by virtue of censorship for the restoration of the republic. And so when you're talking about the restoration of the republic, you're talking about constitutional enforcement and treaty enforcement at the same time. You must know that relationship. And so if you see DeSantis and others talking about civics, guaranteed they're teaching, they're leaning toward teaching proper government and de jure government, distinguished from de facto.
This is on a different subject, but there were a couple of questions that were the same. I believe this is the same. There was an earlier question about all of the bodies. What was your take on all of the bodies being found in Canaan land? And then another question said, please speak on the massacre in Canada.
One question at a time.
No, I'm saying that the question about speaking on the massacre in Canada, I believe that it may be the same thing. You know that recently they found all the bodies of these indigenous or Aboriginal children.
Yes,
we're aware of that. The person wanted to know. I mean, the individual wanted to know if you were aware of that, and we are aware of that. But I don't know what.
Aware before they published.